Okay, so this talk is on behalf of a postdoc of mine, William Arlich, and it deals with causal inference. So essentially, the question of causal mechanisms, and this is something that I think very often is not well studied because people don't have control groups and it's very hard to do experiments. So in this particular case, we took advantage of a natural experiment of a closure, actually, of the harvest fishery for Western Baltic cod. And the question is, how did this change behavior, perceptions, and so on? So Western Baltic cod is a relevant target species, actually was the prime target species desired by German recreational anglers. And unfortunately, the stock underwent, as many other cod stocks, very strong declines. We all know the textbook example of Newfoundland cod. We have many other stocks, and the Western Baltic went through the same decline of historic overfishing and then a collapse beyond the reference points, very low recruitment levels, and essentially the catches dwindled as well. And in response, this is managed by the European Union. There were several measures implemented to control commercial fishing, way too late, but also recreational fishing. And essentially in 2017, for the first time, a daily bag limit was introduced to regulate recreational harvest. And as you see here, that went down over time to a closure in 2024, where you actually are not allowed to keep any cod. So it went from a free harvest fishery to a controlled one since 2017 to a closure. And you can imagine this is a major tipping point for the recreational anglers. And we were interested in how did the people respond to this closure. You should also note that the cod fishery is very much consumptive, so it generates a lot of utility by harvest, but very little by catch and release, at least for the German anglers. So we studied these recreational cod anglers in 2020. We designed a big survey, and we also surveyed at the same time coastal pike anglers. So it's a nearby fishery more inshore, and this was at the time where the fishery for cod was still open. And then we got the institutional tipping point of a closure of the cod fishery, but not the pike fishery. And then we resurveyed the same people in 2024. So we have a before-after control impact or difference in difference design, so we can really look at the effects on the cod anglers while controlling for the temporal changes through the pike anglers. Why do we think are the pike anglers a good control, or economists would call it counterfactual? Because it's in the same broader area of the Baltic Sea. They also experienced a declining cod stock trend, but they didn't experience a closure of the harvest fishery. So it's a proper counterfactual to study this. Now, if you look at, for example, the self-reported effort of the anglers, and you would just look at the cod anglers, you see these are the data points. So the cod anglers tell us that they fished much more days in 2019 than they fish today. And a naive viewer would say, well, obviously there's some effect of our closure, but of course, you know, the time period 2020 was the pandemic, many other things changed, so we cannot be sure that this trend has anything to do with the closure. And for that, we need a control or counterfactual, which our pike anglers are. So we look at the interaction term, and for example, the effort in the directed pike angling compared to the directed cod angling, and if this gap changes over time, that's actually a causal inference you can draw from there. So from this, you see very clearly that the effort in general, not for cod, but in general declined, and when you do the stats, it's actually significant. So there's a causal effect on effort caused by the cod closure. If you look specifically at cod angling effort, or in the pike anglers on pike angling effort, you obviously see the same thing. The cod specific effort really went to almost nothing, and we didn't see the German cod anglers substituting by cod elsewhere. So there was actually a huge drop in the cod specific effort causally related to the closure of the fishery. We then looked at species spillover. I mean, you change the cods, so what do you do next? Do you stop fishing or do you fish for something else? This is a complicated graph. We have actually in the survey asked for multiple species and the effort that they devote to. I clustered it here by other marine fishes or freshwater species, and you see that the cod anglers move up. They basically substituted other marine fishes for the loss of the cod, and they didn't do this with the freshwater fish. And again, all the stats on here are significant. If you look in more detail, you see here the after targeting behavior in the dark colors and the before targeting behavior for multiple species in the light colors. And if you look carefully here for the cod anglers, you see a rise across the board of alternative species: flounder, flatfish, sea trout, and so on. So they basically diffuse the effort to other fish, most of them which are not regulated. So you're essentially regulating one fishery and creating a spillover to weakly regulated or unregulated species. And all of this was strongly significant. We also changed how people believe the stock is doing. And this is interesting as a psychologist. Do we have a spillover on the psychology, not just on the behavior of people? And here you see perceptions of stock trends. So how is the cod stock doing? And you see a very strong negative effect. So essentially, after experiencing the closure, the anglers are actually convinced that the stock is doing more poorly, and compared to the pike anglers who actually are also experiencing a bad stock, but you don't see that change. So there's a causal effect on the perception of the stock status, actually also on the trend caused by the experience. And then we were interested, can we even alter preferences for management tools? So we exposed the anglers with a question where we said, okay, imagine the fishery would be reopened in the future. Which tools would you prefer, and in which configuration in terms of the harvest regulations? And the one that was regulated was the back limits, and you see here that we don't see the p-value. Do I show it there? It's actually 0.147. So there was a little bit of a trend that the anglers would prefer a lower back limit in the future, the cod anglers, relative to the pike anglers, but this change was not significant. So it was not really an alteration of the preference for the back limit that we could statistically find. We tested other harvest regulations. So this is a complicated figure because we asked for a harvest slot. So what's your preference for a minimum and a maximum size? And the difference is the width of that slot. And here you see a gap change. So the anglers actually, the cod anglers had altered their preferences significantly. They would accept more restrictive harvest regulation, actually a narrower slot in the future. But if you look at the actual values they would prefer, before it was 45 to 75 centimeter slot, and afterwards it was 48 to 75 on average. So the width changes, it's significant, but it's a small effect. So essentially you change the preference, but it's not radical, right? They would not like catch and release only fishing or something like this. So to conclude, experiencing ecological tipping, so the collapse of the stock, altered behavior, perceptions, and preferences of anglers causally in terms of reducing the overall effort, reducing the cod-specific effort, creating a species spillover to other marine but not freshwater fish, strengthened perceptions that there is a problem with the cod stock, and it slightly increased the potential acceptance of future harvest regulations. So what this basically means is that experiencing ecological tipping and institutional tipping in response has cascading effects socially, economically, and psychologically, which I think is the main contribution of this paper, and potentially has spillover effects to unregulated fisheries that are unintended, right? So the ultimate conclusion is that we really have to get rid of this species-specific management. I mean, we are talking about this since 25 or 30 years. It's hard to do in practice, but it's just another example that if we manage the Baltic Sea, we need to manage the whole species pool, and otherwise we were running behind problems caused by one fishery on the next. Thank you very much. Ah, that was quick. I have no good solution because it's so complex and it's so hard to do, and this is the reason why the practical management remains a single species framework. I mean, and people are grappling with this. So I don't know. The thing I would do different if you just manage recreational fishing is just to at least be aware that whatever you do in that fishery will spill over elsewhere. So making decisions in isolation is really bad. So, I mean, you should really then strengthen the harvest regulation on those other fisheries, or at least consider those potential behavioral responses when you make a decision. Yeah, I don't know. It will be a tough one, a politically heated one, and the data-wise, it's very hard to put in place, but I think we have to find solutions for this. Because now we are seeing more and more pressure on the sea trout, and they will go down, and yeah, that's definitely not a good outlook.
To have a ecosystem-based management system would also simplify the entire exercise.
Potentially.
For the regulating authority, instead of having to implement all 50 or 60 or 70 different regulations for various species.
It could potentially simplify, but it has to be in a different assessment framework. We cannot carry over the hard quantitative stock assessment exercises. That is really hard to do with, predator-prey interactions and so on. So I don't know. We probably have to have simpler models and simpler decision rules and simpler harvest rules that don't demand this very complex modeling, because that is actually quite difficult. Yeah, so it's maybe more of a principle-based management framework.
Got another question from Karen at the back.
Great presentation as always. I'm interested in whether you found or whether you know that anyone's actually stopped fishing because of harvest regulations. Were there people that just quit fishing?
Yeah, we are analyzing it right now, so it's a separate study where we do substitution behavior analysis and modeling the probability of dropping out. It's very, very low. It's very low. So there are some people who do other things more, cycling, biking, cooking. So we looked at that dropout rates, but they are very small. The people fish less and other species, so it's very rare to drop out just because of cod. But it could be different where you have less substitutes available, right?
Can I also add to that as well? What difference do you think it makes to the economic impact of your recreational fisheries?
I think the economic impact is significant because that's effort-driven, and the overall effort went down. And we do see people moving away from annual licenses to daily or weekly. So there is, I cannot quantify it, we didn't do it, but it will be substantial.
These are the questions I was going to ask.
Yeah, it will be substantial. So that's what I meant by economic. I didn't show data, but there is a consequence to that, yeah.